Setbacks can shake up everything: your routine, your reputation, and your confidence. You know that you're capable, but now you're second guessing yourself. You wonder if maybe others are second guessing you as well. And the longer this drags on, the harder it can be to reset. I have worked with so many professionals who are in this exact place. And to be honest, I have been in this place as well. You're smart, you're talented, but you are completely spinning out. What helped them move forward and what helped me move forward, it wasn't a pep talk and it wasn't being overly positive. We definitely do not do toxic positivity here. What I needed, what they needed was structure and reflection and small intentional steps. And that is what we are walking through in this episode. Welcome to Control Your Career. I am Julia Toothacre, and I'm your strategic career consultant. I'm so glad that you're here. This season, we are working through career challenges that really knock professionals off track. And today we are talking about one of the most destabilizing, a career setback. Whether it's a layoff, a mistake, God forbid, or something that just didn't work out, it's easy to start questioning your own value. But confidence, it's not something that you just get back. You have to rebuild it, and you have to rebuild it piece by piece. And it takes clarity, awareness, and action. So why does our confidence get shaken when we have a career setback? Well, a setback, it's not just affecting your job. It can affect your identity, your routines, and honestly, most importantly, your stability, especially if that is a core value for you. And in the workplace, we are often tying our value to performance and outcomes. And so when we're doing that, and then all of the sudden, something negative happens, again, whether you lose your job or, you get some negative feedback or something of that nature, it can also impact your confidence. And I know not everybody is going to feel this way, but too many people do. And I've seen so many clients come to me where their confidence gets shaken because of something that has happened. And it's usually either a situation within the workforce or feedback that they have received. And what happens is you feel embarrassed, you feel ashamed. Sometimes you feel like you now have to start over because it just hit you so squarely in the chest. And I know you know what I'm talking about. It's that feeling, it's like a gut punch almost, where you don't know where to go because your confidence has just been completely taken from you. And then the self-talk starts to happen and it can get pretty bad. I don't know about you, but my self-talk is mean. It's really mean and I don't like it. And what ends up happening is we say things like, I should have seen this coming. I must not be as good as I thought that I was. Or, well, nobody's going to take you seriously now. What kind of professional are you? These are things that, again, I have said to myself and I have seen clients say to me because whatever the situation was, it completely rocked their world. And now they're trying to figure out how to rebuild and where to go next. And unfortunately, most managers are not equipped to deal with it because they're either the one that inflicted it or you don't have a good enough relationship with that person to be vulnerable enough to share this and allow them to help build you back up because you don't want to be seen as incompetent. And I think it's important to remember that your confidence is really not about pretending that everything is fine and being stoic. I think that's something that we have been taught, but is really not what confidence is. Confidence is really about facing what happened. It's being honest with yourself and then choosing how best to move forward in a way that is going to honor you and help build you back up. So let's go through the control your career process to help process through all of this and figure out what happened and how to move forward well. Realistic reality is going to be one of the hardest in this particular situation because when we have a career setback, regardless of what it is, it forces us to really take an objective look at our role in the situation. To be fair, it is not always our fault, but part of realistic reality is digging deep enough to understand what was in our control and what was outside of our control, because understanding those two things will help you reset your mind a little bit better to understand I'm doing everything that I can and this still happened. This is not me. Or you know what? I could have handled this better. And this is what I think I can do better in the future and owning that. So realistic reality in stage one, what actually happened and what didn't happen is also important because I think sometimes we start to say things that aren't true. They're not rooted in truth and reality. And we have to distinguish between those. So for this situation with a career setback, we have to really name the facts. You have to understand the facts of the situation, not how you felt about it. That's a different thing, but the facts of the situation. So was this a layoff? Was it something that went wrong in a project? Was it a mistake that you made? If it was a layoff, this is so important to understand. What was the reason for the layoff? There are a lot of layoffs happening right now, and it has nothing to do with the people being laid off and everything to do with the organization and how they are handling the structure and all of that. In those scenarios, you have done nothing wrong. You could be very good at your job. You could have all the accolades, all the things. It doesn't matter. The company was moving in a different direction. They reorged and you're out. So in that situation, you have to take a step back and go, this is not me. I did not do anything wrong. Is it terrible? Yes, it is terrible. And we have to take time to grieve and, grieve the loss and all of that. But at the end of the day, it wasn't anything that you did and it wasn't your fault. And so that's the reality of that type of layoff. Now, there are other types of layoffs, which would not be called layoffs. This is when you get fired and you get fired for something that happened. Sometimes it is warranted. Sometimes it is not. This is where we have to dig into what is the truth about what happened, not your perception, not your feelings. What actually happened? Can you put yourself in the shoes of the person that fired you to say, you know what? I did mess up. Do I think that it's worth firing me? Probably not. I would have given me another chance, but that's not what happened. So I have to own that. In some situations, you really did mess up and you messed up bad. And you have to, again, own that and understand why it happened and then work through that into the next position so that it doesn't happen again. This is one of the hardest conversations that I have with clients because most of my clients, they know that they messed up and they're trying to really get back on track. And it's a really hard thing to do because especially if you are a high achiever or you are somebody who really doesn't mess up and you do, it hits your confidence so squarely in the chest and it's so hard to come out of that. So if this is something that as I'm talking, you're like, oh, I'm dealing with this. Sometimes having a coach is really helpful to talk through this and to understand what is your responsibility, what is other people's responsibility. If it is really deep-seated, I recommend therapy. I think that's always a good choice when we're dealing with something that maybe we realize is deeper that is maybe connected to some other kind of trauma that we might have, that's when we want to go the therapy route, to make sure that we can unpack that well and move forward well. So depending on the intensity or the severity will depend on whether or not a coach is the right option or a therapist is the right option. Okay, so we're identifying what actually happened. I talked about a layoff, a bad project, a mistake. Those things happen. Obviously, you're not necessarily going to get fired for them depending on the severity. But again, take a step back. What was your role? What could you have done different? Were the expectations clear? I find with a lot of professionals, management was not clear about the expectations. The employee executes on what they thought they wanted, and then management wanted something different. So who is in the wrong in that scenario? Honestly, it's both, because management should have been clear about what they wanted, but the professional should have asked follow-up questions. And I've actually encouraged some of my clients to push back on management when they say, well, you should have known. Well, no, if I wasn't trained in your way of doing things, then how am I going to know that? So I think there is space to be able to push back, but you have to understand your role within the organization and with your manager and all of that in order to push back well, because you don't want to yell at them or anything like that. Okay, more facts to consider about your situation. Were other people impacted? So I've seen this happen as well, where maybe you're leading a team, something goes poorly, and somebody else gets disciplined for it, when really were you a part of that? And could it have been prevented? And so being very clear about who was impacted, why, and did it have something to do with you? I think also context matters here. And this is when we're digging in deep to some of these career setbacks. Really understanding the context of the situation is so helpful. So has the company shifted in some way? Are there changes that have been made in the company that you can see the connection? I have a friend who's had 12 managers in 2 years. Okay. That's not good. That means we have a lot of shifts and changes. And similarly, what leadership has changed? Have you had a lot of different managers in a short period of time? That makes it hard to execute on your work well, because you're having to constantly shift with the new expectations of a new leader. Are there new demands? With so many layoffs happening in multiple industries and multiple functions, are you the last one standing on the team? And now you're having to make up the work of 4 people or 5 people, whatever it looks like. And so understanding those new demands and being able to have a conversation with your manager around, hey, I'm seeing this happening. What are your expectations of me now? And that's a conversation we can have to potentially prevent a setback from happening, or a mistake from happening, or a project getting dropped, whatever it might be. When we're talking about realistic reality and this topic specifically around career setbacks and our confidence and all of that, we have to separate our identity from the outcome. And so often we enmesh the two, and we really put our identity into this thing that happened. Layoffs are a great example of this. Just getting bad feedback. Some people really cannot take negative feedback well, and so they internalize it, and it becomes part of their identity. I'm a bad person. I'm not a good professional. I'm not good at what I do. Well, those things likely aren't true, but you're connecting things that don't need to be connected. So we have to keep our identity separate. And this is why I like going through realistic reality for this and focusing on facts and not feelings. If you start spinning out into feelings, you have to stop yourself. And if you want to make note of those feelings, that's fine, but you do need to keep them separate. And then I mentioned this earlier, but what I believe is so important to understand, and part of the context of these scenarios is what was in your control and what wasn't in your control. And I talked about, company changes and leadership shifting, new demands, all of that. Some of that, actually, most of that is not within your control. And so what can you control? Well, you can control the follow-up conversations. You can control how you conduct yourself. You can control what you talk about and how you talk about it. You can be proactive about some things and, have a good understanding of what people were working on and what's going to fall onto your plate and have those conversations, right? Be realistic about just the workload and all of that. So what is within your control versus what isn't? And if it's not in your control, you have to separate from that and you have to use it as context to go, you know what? There is nothing I could have done differently here that would have impacted this outcome. And therefore, I know this is not me. Yes, it's a bad thing that happened, but it's not me. And so I understand that, and I'm going to move forward, not connecting to that. I recognize how hard it is to do that. It is not easy. So I'm not saying that that's not going to take some time to get to, but that is ultimately where you want to get to. All right, let's look at stage 2, which is identity analysis. I find when clients go through career setbacks, we have to go back to the basics. And we have to go back to the basics because it makes my clients just question everything about themselves, and usually to the negative. And so we have to take a step back and we have to go, okay, let's talk about your interests. Well, okay, we're going to go through a couple things. Interests, skills, values, and work preferences. Those are like the core pieces of ourselves that we have to go back to. So starting with interests, what parts of your work are you most drawn to? What do you fall back on when you lose your confidence? Is there something that re-energizes you, that makes you feel good? So when I was working full-time for an organization, the thing that always brought my confidence back was meeting with clients. Always. That was the time. It was a combination of that. And then there were some committees that I was on that I really enjoyed and were very life-giving. And so those were the things that I really looked forward to help counteract what was going on in other parts of my job. So what are things that you are drawn to that are going to give you some energy? And can we do a little more of that for the next little while to make sure that your confidence does come back? Looking at your skills. We've talked a lot about skills over the last few episodes, but thinking about what the setback was and is it connected to your skills? Because sometimes if we make a mistake, if we get some negative feedback for whatever reason, sometimes it's a skill issue. Sometimes you just don't have the right information or you just don't know something. And so you have to upskill in that area. And it might not be a hard skill. I think that's important to note. It might be a soft skill that you need. And so what does that look like for you? What do you already have that you're doing really well? And then maybe where are some gaps? I think understanding your skill set is important, especially during a layoff situation, because a lot of times we do question, well, am I not good at my job? I mean, you probably were and it had nothing to do with you. And so reevaluating the skills that you have is going to be really helpful to bring back that confidence. Values are always going to be core for me. I have a values worksheet. If you haven't gone through your values recently, I highly recommend that. I will link it into the blog post. I think the blog post for this episode. But looking at your values will also help you realign in terms of, is this something that I can get past, or is it something that's really going to take me out? There is a big difference between a layoff where you are separating from an organization and a bad project or a mistake. So I want to make sure that we understand the difference between the two and then how that's going to impact our personality. A layoff is going to have a much bigger impact than a mistake or a project that went awry because the layoff is going to hit us in a different way. And so I just want to make sure that you understand the intensity difference between the two. Because values are going to become really important in a layoff scenario because you have to understand what you want and need in order to make some good decisions moving forward. But even with a bad project or a mistake, what was going on there is something connected to your values. It might not be, but it might be helpful to reconnect with your values in order to be more confident about who you are. And because again, you disconnect from yourself when negative things happen because you start to blame and all of that. And then looking at work preferences, I think this is so helpful for the bad project mistake scenario because were you in a situation where your ideal work preferences were there? Or were you having to constantly adjust or fight against yourself in order to make something happen? And so when we look at like realistic reality, what actually happened? And then was that fighting against something that was core to who we are? And I think that distinction is really helpful when we've made a mistake of some kind to understand why that mistake happened in the first place. I think it's so good for us to understand that when there is a setback, when something negative happens to us at work, when we realign and restabilize into our core professional identity, that's what's going to help give us our confidence back. It's not going to be the title we have. It's not going to be our status in the organization or even a conversation that we have. It's really going to be looking back at yourself, looking at your core and going, yeah, this is who I am. And sometimes that can help you go, I don't feel bad about that situation. I feel like I handled that the way that I wanted to. And yes, I may have been disciplined for it, but I'm okay with that. It's not always going to be like that. And that's very nuanced, but that is something that you have to understand about who you are and your personality. All right, let's get into stage 3, which is purpose-driven plan. These are going to be our goals when we have some type of setback in our career. Now, what I'm going to do for this is give you some generic goals to consider, but going through the first 2 stages, you should have some idea of what would be helpful for you moving forward. Because again, this is a personalized process. You have to choose the goals that are going to be the best for your particular situation. So when we are going through a setback, part of the thing that we are trying to do is rebuild our confidence. And so what can that look like? I honestly recommend small wins. And so really looking at goals that are easy to reach quickly. So this could be maybe reaching out to somebody that you really admire to have a conversation about what's going on in the industry, or even a mentor that you can talk about the setback with in a way that is helpful, that can help you reframe, and maybe they can share some situations that have happened to them to normalize it for you. Something that I really think is helpful for rebuilding confidence is going back and reflecting on all my wins in my career. And some of you haven't done that before. And so starting that process and going through each position you've had and what went really well and what were those highlights and wins, I think is really great. It's a really great practice. And it does help bolster your confidence. Bonus, if you do that with somebody else, like have somebody else who can really hype you up, because you likely will not hype yourself up appropriately. I can attest to that. Okay. So sometimes we want the goal to be, I want to feel more confident. It's a little vague. It's vague in terms of language. So I would think more about, I want to be aligned with my position and with where I'm headed in my career. And I think the word alignment allows us to think through the possible goals and actions associated with that. I think feeling confident is going to look different for everybody as well. So if you do want to use that language, you then have to articulate for yourself what is going to make you feel confident. And then that will also get connected to your goals. Also, understanding what type of success you want. And that is a little bit of a longer term goal. But I think when we are high performing and we get knocked back, it can help to reconnect with what success looks like ultimately. And that allows us to then realign to that and make sure that we are taking actions that are going to get us to that ultimate success point, whatever success means to you. And that can look however it needs to look for you. Okay. So my main thing for stage 3, honestly, small wins. What are the small things that you can do? And then reconnecting to that ultimate idea of success for you. Then we go into stage 4, which is where we are going to take action. And again, your action is going to be related to your goals, but I'm going to give you some sample actions that you can take that align to what we have already talked about. I think it's important to note that when we're talking about rebuilding confidence, in order to do that, we have to take action. If all we do is talk about the thing, if all we do is reflect about the thing, we're going to spin out. We're going to crash out. And so we have to take that step back and go, yes, I do need to reflect, but I also need to take a step of action. And what is that action going to be? So kind of similar to goals. If one of your goals is to talk to somebody, you obviously want to identify who that is, but then actually talk to that person. So schedule a time to speak with them or meet with them is really helpful. Similar to your list of accomplishments, if you already have that list, go back through, read through it, reiterate what makes you awesome. I think that's always helpful. If you keep, I know I used to keep a file of positive emails that I received. That might be something that is a really good action for you, just to remind you who you are as a professional and the feedback that you have received. One action that I think is really helpful, especially if you had a bad project or just some really negative feedback for whatever reason, is find like a low risk but quick win type of project to work on, whether that's something that you normally do in your position or something that you want to take on, sometimes even volunteering. So something outside of work can also be really helpful, just to help remind you of who you are as a professional, and really just reignite that confidence for yourself. And then an action that I think gets overlooked a lot as well is learning something new. So this could be, going to a training or taking a course. Going to a conference, I actually think is the best option if you have a conference coming up. But learning something to help remind you, oh, yes, I do love this. Yes, I am good at this. And here's what I would do. And here's this. And that helps just reset your brain into going, yeah, this is what I want to do. I am good at what I do. And that was just something that happened. And I have to learn from it. And then finally, we move into stage 5, which is high impact habits. Now, with this topic of career setbacks and rebuilding confidence and all of that, I am not going to be as concerned about habits here, because we have to work through the feelings. We have to work through what happened. We have to get through all that negativity in order to move forward, and then the habits will come. So this is not something that I would prioritize when it comes to this particular topic. However, there are some habits that I think are helpful once you get past like the initial shock of what has happened. Um, so doing like a weekly check-in with yourself around what went well. So focusing on the positive, not on the negative. I mentioned this before in goals and actions, but keeping a document of your wins. If you haven't created that document, I would create it for yourself and then just update it weekly or monthly, or just as something happens. And keep it off of any work programs, like keep it on your phone or keep a physical journal for it. During this time specifically, don't overcommit to things. I think sometimes we feel like we need to prove ourselves and we start saying yes to a lot of things and then we burn out. So just in your mind, think about, I'm going to give myself space, which some of you are going to say, I don't need space. I need to stay busy. Well, you're just deflecting at that point, and so that's not helpful either. But give yourself some space. Do not overcommit. So that's why I don't feel like habits are the thing that I would focus on first, because I feel like that's a little bit of an overcommitting action, and I don't think it's the right thing to do. So definitely wait a little bit before you implement, but also don't overcommit yourself to other things. I would also find somebody in your organization that you trust to get an opinion or feedback from, maybe regularly. This is also something I do in coaching. So my clients that coach with me regularly, so we're on like a retainer option, which I don't take a lot of clients on retainer, but the ones that I do, this is a lot of what we talk about is what happened. Do we need to reframe something? We talk about wins. We talk about just situations and scenarios that happened and how we can work through and move past it. And it's helpful because they get a really objective view of what has happened. And it also allows me to play into the realistic reality and ask them more pointed questions to get them out of their feelings and into what actually happened. So that's something you might be interested in. You can always schedule a clarity call with me if that's something that you want to do. But again, habits, low priority when it comes to this. I really want you to take some time to reflect, take some small actions to rebuild your confidence. Confidence is not going to come back like all at once at one time. It's going to come back through moments and those small wins. You know, when you choose to speak up again, when you take action, when you start seeing yourself clearly, when you go through that identity analysis process, instead of looking at yourself through the lens of this single setback. So today we looked at how to rebuild your confidence with intention. We're not going to fake it. We're not waiting to feel better. Okay. We're not being stagnant. We are going to keep working forward, working our way forward, one step at a time, taking those small actions to rebuild the confidence. And remember, you do not have to wait until you feel ready to make any kind of move. You want to make a move and your confidence will continue to grow. It's a shift, right? It's a shift. A setback is a shift. It's not necessarily as bad as you think that it is, but how you respond to it is going to shape really how you move forward and how you respond to other things happening in your career. So if this episode hit home for you, here are a few ways to keep the momentum going. One is going to be downloading my Control Your Career worksheet to help you work through some of these things and brainstorm for yourself to move through from the setback to regaining that confidence. I'd love for you to share this episode with a colleague, maybe somebody that you've had some conversations with where they have had some setbacks and would benefit from this conversation. I would love for you to subscribe so that you can get all the episodes from this season and future seasons. And if you're not already on my email list, I would highly recommend that you sign up for that. Not only do I talk about new episodes that are releasing in the podcast, but I'm trying to give some new background information about what is going on with the book that I'm writing. Yes, I am still writing it. It is happening, I promise. But thanks for being here. I know these conversations aren't always easy to hear, but they do matter. So keep showing up for yourself. And as always, keep taking control of your career.